You have a question? Go ahead.
We're in October Gallery. This is one of the older galleries in Philadelphia, very prominent. They have done a lot to promote black art, black artists, artistic genius and creativity over the years. They're most famous for their October Gallery art exhibit, and they've been at this for quite some time. We're going to talk briefly with the curator, and he'll give us a brief synopsis of what they're doing and how things are going, the state of black art in this country and around the world. You got a minute?
Yeah, just it's going to start in 2 seconds, all right?
Okay.
I just want to get it up.
Just one time.
Anybody want water?
Make it quick. You
Okay.
got 5 minutes.
Okay. Listen, you know, I just wonder, I'm going to ask the question. How do you feel when mainstream people say to you, we don't even talk about slavery? That happened a million years ago. You know, what does that mean? Huh? I mean,
It means-
you saw this. This was brutal. Okay, I'm sorry.
It means
Go ahead.
that
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
the people who do that and say that happened a long time ago are 99 times out of 100, or 99 and a half times. They're not only are they white people, but they're also people who enjoy privileges today as a result of what our ancestors, the sacrifices they made. So to acknowledge that means that they have to then, the next step after acknowledging slavery and the horrors of it means that you now got to be prepared to let go of some of your privileges. And ain't none of them doing that. So that's why they'll say, oh, that was a long time ago. So they want to distance what the lifestyles they have and the lives they live and the privileges they enjoy. They want to distance that as far away as they can so that there's no connection. So that it has something to do to help them perpetuate.
I think they
Let me
respect,
let this
I
in first.
really think they respect the fact that we are black, and that back in the day, there was a time such as it was. I don't think people are disrespecting or saying that they don't want to hear it. They know about it. It hurts on the inside to go through, even to watch this, it hurt.
It hurt who, them or us?
It hurt everyone, I think, all black people. I cannot even imagine a black person
I'm talking
not.
about white, do you think white people feel the same kind of pain?
Some, yeah, some.
But I'm
Some have
just,
common sense, some.
let me just do this, sister, let me get your comment.
Well, I think it has a lot to do with
is a new concept.
when you were born. We don't know anything about the African continent. You know, and there are some things that when you try to ask questions to, even when you were little, your parents didn't even know. So this is why they send us to school trying to learn as much as we can. But then again, you have people that come here, your African brothers and sisters that come here, and they don't treat us like we're related, so to speak. Even though they may have some information that we want to learn, and they come here and they want to learn. But it's kind of hard because in between, you're still getting all this prejudice. Black on black prejudice is terrible.
Well, but you gotta also appreciate the extent to which we gotta be fair to ourselves. And that means we can't overlook the powerful influence of colonialism. There's a reason that today in 2020 that you turn on the television and you see a courtroom in any country in Africa, that the black judges are sitting there with white wigs on. To understand how deep that colonial stuff was. And there's a reason why we're looking at, Sudan and South Sudan, still at civil war, and Ethiopia and Somalia. And so all of this was, and even in the Congo, all of this is the result of what the colonizers did to make sure that they developed those countries that they occupied in a way that supported them, with no regard for the people who lived in these places, right? And as a result of that, what happened was when the African countries got their independence, you saw things like, for example, in Nigeria, where all of the resources are in one part of the country, which is indigenous to a certain particular tribe. So now that disadvantage, the resources and the infrastructure. So now that allows one part of the population to be in power and favor themselves at the expense of this other. So it's a recipe for the kind of disruption and disaster. We can't ignore that just because these countries, have independence. And speaking of that, we want to make sure people understand there are 54 countries in Africa. Africa's not a country, right? There's a continent, right? And so when you go to Jamaica or go to some other country and they say, where are you from? You don't say I'm from North America. You say I'm from Philadelphia or Pennsylvania or the United States. But we refer to Africa as a country, like it's a country. Oh, he's an African. But listen, you're in Africa, and if you're a Ghanaian, that's a whole different thing than being a Rwandan or a Zambian or, East Africa. So, now the question, though, I want to follow up with you on, Rosanna, is to ask if, having done that, so you've seen both sides of the ocean as a person of African descent. From what you've seen going there, and the adjustment you had to make, and what you saw in terms of how you were received and everything, would you say, as an African American, it's too late?
No. But I do feel that if African Americans go to Africa, they have to go with a lot of understanding. They can't just jump in. It won't.
Elaborate what that means.
African Americans, for one thing, this information you just gave, the majority of African Americans don't even know that. That's a big thing not to not know and go to Africa. There are 54 countries, and in every country there's a different culture, and in every country there's many different cultures within the country itself. There are many different languages within the country itself. And so, a Senegalese who's next to a Malian in Mali, they don't speak the same language necessarily, they don't understand each other's culture fully necessarily, and there are lots of things like that to understand when you go to Africa.
Right.
And I also, I have a lot of people ask me, do you know your origins? What are your origins? Did you do your DNA? I don't really believe in that because,
That's a whole nother.
That's a whole nother.
Science.
And you're absolutely right not to, but that's something we need to talk about at another time. Mercy, make a list of the kind of topics for the coming up. African ancestry and DNA and whether should you or shouldn't. Go on.
But we may have, I do have a tendency for one culture and one people who a lot of people believe I may come from, assume that I'm from, when I come to.
What's that?
Fulani.
Ooh, go ahead, girl.
But,
You kind of got that Fulani thing going on.
No.
People do that too.
Yeah.
I actually did an art project once where I did photograph myself as different women because people were always asking me, what are you?
Are you
So I did myself as a Moroccan, as an Ethiopian, as a Mauritanian, as a...
But so it's similar, when we talk about those 54 countries on the continent of Africa, that's like somebody saying, you know what, I want to go to the United States. I'm moving, I want to go there to live, there's opportunity or whatever. Now, their experience if they go and land in Mississippi is going to be different than if they land in Boston. And it's going to be different than if they go to Chicago. And it's gonna be different than if they go to Texas. And it's gonna be different than if they go to California, right? So we have to understand that kind of diversity about the cultural makeup of the countries comprising the continent of Africa. And so for so long, we have to also realize how disadvantaged we've been, because how many people learned about Africa in grade school? In grade school? Write her name down. I want to
Baby boomers.
this one.
Baby boomers.
Huh?
Baby boomers.
But what did you? Well, see, because what did you learn? Did you really learn about Africa, or you were
I
told?
just learned that it was a continent.
It was a continent. I'm just saying.
Black people, and that was it.
No, I actually, amazingly, I had this conversation with somebody earlier today, that I still remember when I was in, I think it was 4th grade, 5th grade, we actually had a series of discussions. I was in Brooklyn, New York, and I still remember about the Okapi. I remember about pygmies and the Watusi and some other tribes. We talked about the different landscapes. So we learned about animals, we learned about the topography, we learned about different tribes, and there was a series of books that we could read, and we read through them. It was a public school in Brooklyn, and I still remember, and I'm now 55, and I still remember that from when I was 9 years old, because for whatever reason, I don't know why, but it just left an impression on me. And unfortunately, now my daughter has gone through public schools, she's been in private schools here in Philadelphia, over in South Jersey, and there was not one thing taught about Africa or about really the depths of even African American history until she went to high school. She went to Girls High, and the teacher in her 9th grade African American history class actually had them go in depth on different topics. He didn't talk about Martin Luther King, he didn't talk about Frederick Douglass, he talked about issues and he took them deep. And as a result, I think it made a difference for her, and it made a difference for
So here's the thing though,
the
this
other.
is what's the problem, and that's I'm glad to hear that, but the problem is we're in a room full of black people, and there were 3 people said that they got exposed to who our history as children, at impressionable and formative times in their lives, right? Because most of us can remember, everybody remember Tarzan and Jane, right? They had us so programmed, we liked the little monkey better than we liked them Africans that was out to get Tarzan. That's right. Right? So I'm just saying, so you got to understand the problem.
And the problem is, like, I know my parents didn't talk about black history, but then they were in the throes of it. I remember as a kindergartner marching around the school when Martin Luther King Jr. was shot. And we I don't know, was, for whatever reason, the school thought that would be a good way of showing support or whatever. But I know I personally took an interest in making sure that my daughter received from me in our house some African American history. So she had the book, Lift Every Voice and Sing, and that had the words for all of the choruses, all of the stanzas in the back, but the story was just a beautiful depiction of
that you like teaming with, and emotional energy after having seen it. And this question comes up about Africa. What I would like to do is ask you. I know that you saw this. This movie didn't necessarily have to do with directly coming from Africa, but it's a part of the reality of our reality. I would like to know, does that come up for you? Does Africa come up for you after watching a film like this? What comes up? What actually is, or what kind of emotions and thoughts and reflections are you having after having seen this film in relation to this discussion?
Mine is that we have been brutalized and beaten and hated upon all these years. That's what I take from it.
And do you have any connection as far as Africa is concerned? Does that come up
Well, I have a few African friends that tell me things. My girlfriend Kua, she was telling me that she didn't understand why people were so into diamonds and rubies when they already always had that. You know, so she was probably a queen or something, you know, our parents or whatever. But she would always say, I don't know why people here in America are into diamonds, and you know, she would tell me a few things. But she also told me that they were never enslaved where she was, because she was telling me, she said there are all parts of Africa, different places there, and she never, her and her family never experienced that. Some of her friends probably, you know, their families in a different place, but they never experienced that. So my take when I was a young girl, always thought that African people were riding around with elephants on and different things because this is the way what they always showed. And as I got older, then I started learning more things.
So one of the curators one of the professors from Africana Studies at Penn, he was the curator for the redesigning of this African galleries, and he commissioned my husband and I to be part of this and to be one of the 3 artists he invited to exhibit alongside this new way of presenting the art in the museum. And so his idea or his purpose was, because traditionally they show African art in museums based on their aesthetic values, like, oh, you know how Picasso looked at them, and, you know, they were abstract and whatnot. And so he wanted to show it from a different perspective. He wanted to show that these objects they're not just beautiful aesthetically, but these objects actually represented something when they were taken from Africa. A lot of them had a lot to do with how the culture was set up, how the empires were set up, how the, you know, everything. And so when they were taken away spiritually and in every way, the cultures kind of fell apart in many places because these objects were gone from there. And what they represented were powerful things. And so he also talks about when they were robbed, they were also people who were robbed with them. You know, and the absence of those people affected the continent. So now we have a continent that is not whole anymore. And then we're here on the other side, and we represent what would have been that wholeness, our physical selves, and then this art as well. So he wanted some contemporary African artists to produce some work that spoke to, that kind of was in conversation with those artworks that were in the gallery, and to actually say these objects were actually stolen goods. You know, they're not just artifacts, but they're stolen goods, and they represented something powerful. So we can also look at Africa in that way when we think about what Africa means to us. It's a part of us that you just can't disconnect from. And Africa has to start looking at us as this part of it that it can't disconnect from. You know, it's the same as that artwork. You know, it's like these 2, you know, parts that are just kind of pulling towards each other in a way. And when you look at it as a whole, you see what it really is. So,
What about the question?
The
The
question,
most difficult.
the most
adjustment
difficult adjustment.
that you had to adjust to when you got, what was the most challenging part of that transition?
Well, it would have been kind of, it was in phases for me, because when I first went there for the longest period, I was on my own as a woman, a young woman, going on my own. I did a lot of things. I traveled to 7 different countries, went in rural regions by myself, I was working with street youth, etc., produced a major exhibit, and then I went back to live there permanently, married. And I married and moved there to Senegal and lived there and started raising children. So if I think of it all together, the hardest part was raising children with my own values in that cultural context with the values that were, you know, there. And, you know, my husband may have had, or his family may have had, that were different from mine.
So give us a